Welcome to the new age of American competitiveness, where there's an abundance of jobs, yet anything less than a bachelor's degree leaves you unqualified to fill them. And somehow, we let a group of elites comprised of legislative bureaucrats, a billion-dollar testing industry, and lazy administrators decide that a 4-hour test should determine whether or not someone should be able to get these jobs. Because this system is at best stupid and at worst destructive, I affirm, resolved. In the United States, colleges and universities ought not consider standardized tests in undergraduate admissions decisions. The focus of this debate should be maximizing educational equity. Anyone can fill a job if they have qualifications, but we shouldn't ignore how access to those qualifications are divided on racial and socioeconomic lines. Solving educational disparities requires focusing on equity when we talk about consequences. Contention 1. The history of standardized tests is plagued with oppression. They say history can tell you a lot about the future. This is the historical record of standardized testing. The first comprehensive standardized tests were created in the early 1900s by a psychologist named Alfred Binet and were used to determine which kids didn't have the aptitude for school. We then universalized this process in order to determine who could get into major institutions like the Army. And while their effect on institutions like the Army no longer exists, their effect and influence on college admissions does. Yes, we took a test that was meant to identify and then subsequently give up on disabled kids and determined that this was the best way to determine who got to go to college. And don't leave out the black kids. Actually, do leave out the black kids. When black kids were finally able to go to selective schools, they were subject to these same tests, despite the fact that preparation for these tests had been skewed in favor of white children since the 1950s. It should also come as no surprise the same format was used in order to determine whether black people would get access to the polls during the Jim Crow era. Starting to see a pattern here? According to Zachary Goldfarb of the Washington Post, Asians and whites get much higher scores than other ethnic groups. It appears the advantage of white students over black students and Hispanic students is roughly similar for the reading, math, and writing tests. When economic futures depend on these test scores, they produce cycles of poverty that leave black and brown people without the economic resource to create change for themselves and their communities. So as long as we're starting a national conversation on race, on everything, from syrup bottles to statues, we might want to add the worst educational policy ever to that list. Contention 2. The test create a horrible standard for student evaluation. Advocates of standardized testing, like this guy next to me, will say that it's the most efficient way of making complex admission decisions. They will say that it's objective and beautiful. But that's the reason the tests suck. They place so much value on being an efficient and objective way of making decisions / excluding weak applicants that they ignore the subjective factors that make certain groups fit into that weak applicant category. They ignore that black and brown people often do not have access to the same resources that would be necessary to prepare adequately for these tests. But, sacrificing the poor and people of color for efficiency is an American tradition. It's gotten so bad that sometimes even when you pass the test, you can still fail the test. According to Jason Hanna of CNN, a black student named Camilla Campbell from Florida retook the SAT and raised her score from a 900 to a 1230. The College Board thought that was so impressive that they voided her score and she had to retake the test. How many black kids did this happen to that don't get a national profile or spotlight on them? When you put everything on these tests, it encourages a bunch of horrible practices. It encourages teachers to abdicate valuable curriculum in order to teach towards the test, and it encourages students to give up basic health and care in order for making sure that they can pass this 4-hour test. Look, our solution is simple. Just make the colleges do an evaluation on all of the students. The way that the test is framed is made specifically so that they can exclude students on the front end, which is just a disservice to all of the work that they would have done. According to Dr. Stephen Dando of Brandeis, a successful national movement to eliminate the use of standardized tests for admissions and scholarship allocation would strike a blow against prevailing inequality and injustice in higher education. Contention 3. It's really important that we don't rely on the test now. The pandemic places a ridiculous amount of pressure on students that makes testing inaccurate now. Kelly McCarthy of ABC News reports that the SAT and ACT were forced to suspend and testing, and future digital testing will be unpredictable. Tons of colleges are catching on and removing the requirements. According to Neil Vigdor and Johnny Neal of the New York Times, more than 24 schools, including Harvard, Cornell, all the UC schools, Williams, Amherst, Tulane, and more, have all waived the requirement to submit tests. But that's just not good enough. As long as there's still the possibility or consideration of these tests, it will create an incentive for students to race towards them anyway, which means that we need to take advantage of the momentum that we have right now and say, loud and proud, that colleges and universities should not consider these tests at all.
David, what is Stanford's acceptance rate?
I don't know. I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Okay, it's about 4%, which means about, I think, 50 to 60,000 people get rejected. My question is about the impact of the test. Is the impact of the test being bad purely because all of these thousands of people don't have a chance to get into schools like Stanford, Harvard, etc.?
Well, I think that Stanford is probably an extreme example of it, but yeah.
Why?
I think
because other colleges also have that same acceptance rate, and you don't need a big SAT or ACT score to go to other schools.
Yeah, I understand that.
So why is that not the biggest impact?
No, because our argument is about the ability for people not even to be considered in that process, right? I cannot say for someone why they apply to Stanford or not, but my argument is that the reason why these tests are problematic is because they allow us to push certain students out.
Got it. So my question is now
from consideration.
My question is Stanford's, Harvard, their acceptance rate is probably not going to change if we get rid of tests. So at that point, if 50,000 people still get rejected, how does your case or your solution resolve
because
that?
My argument is about the ability for certain students to be considered in that process, which I think is
okay.
valuable.
So we both agree that the colleges do have to reject a lot of people.
Yeah, they're going to reject people.
Okay, so now
my argument is not that you should give black kids a free pass to college.
Yeah, I understand that. So my next question then becomes, what metric of evaluation will these prestigious universities use that still have to reject thousands of people in order to evaluate the kids that you're talking about?
All the metrics that they use for the kids that pass the SAT benchmark, i.e. their extracurriculars, their essay, their socioeconomic status, all those things.
Let's talk about those. Why are those better than the tests? Because it seems like
it's not a question of whether or not those are better than the tests.
Well, no, it seems like they have to be.
Well,
otherwise, why would we get rid of the test?
Because the idea is that the test is not a yes/no question on whether or not you get into the college. It's
Agreed.
a yes/no question on whether or not you get considered.
But neither are the extracurricular activities, right?
Huh?
Neither is anything. Nothing's a yes/no.
No, those extracurricular activities, your grades, etc., those do determine whether you.
Wait, but those can't be a yes/no because there's 50,000 people that will be no.
Yeah, so there has to be some. That would be a yes/no then, but I digress. My argument here is that those things get considered for the kids that pass the SAT benchmark. We should universalize that and allow all kids that do it to be considered. Whether they'll be rejected or not after that consideration is not the question that we have posed.
So here's my next question. So now you're basically saying we need to get everybody a seat at the table. If they get a seat at the table, because they're just going to get there, because there's no barrier like a test, and they have no...
That's kind of reductionist, but sure, keep going.
Well, that's your case, right? They're going to get there because they have no barrier.
They're probably not going to get to the college, but
to the admissions table, the admissions process.
Sure.
All right. Now, if they don't have any extracurricular activities listed because of all the socioeconomic factors you listed, like schools maybe don't have as much funding as other schools, then why would they even get accepted?
Then most of them would get rejected in the world we live in right now.
So hold on. If you had a chance to get a good SAT or ACT score, wouldn't you still get to the table?
If you did absolutely nothing except that, for most colleges that are competitive, you would still be you would still end up being like pretty bad off.
Okay.
So you still have to consider those things.
All right. I'm not the biggest proponent for standardized tests. But the problem is that standardized tests are better than every other solution without standardized tests. This debate is not a question about how ethical or good the standardized tests are. So all the arguments David said about how they have a bad past and how they may be having a bad present, we get it, and we will agree with that. Any of those arguments talked about in the next couple speeches don't have an impact because I already agree with them. The impact to this debate is simply a question of, when it comes to the admissions process, which is better? Having a test that everyone in the country has to take and has an equal chance to take it and potentially get an equal score, or any of the other criteria that David has outlined as a good metric for evaluation. If we show that all those other criteria make things slightly worse than having a test, then that is simply a reason for why you can't vote to get rid of the standardized test. Couple arguments in this speech, and then I'll be going on to David's arguments. Our first argument is that colleges will simply shift their focus from tests to look at other worse criteria that are going to be bad for all of the people David talked about. One of our authors says that socioeconomic factors underlie so many aspects of the admissions process that eliminating standardized testing would do little to eliminate wealthy students' overall advantage. So when people call for the broad implementation of test optional policies, if not the outright abolition of standardized tests, I wonder whether they've actually thought through what the consequences will look like on a practical level. What is the impact to this argument? This means that students with the least access to all of the other activities and criteria that David says you need to do well in order to get access to these colleges will be hurt the most. If your school has less funding for activities, if your school doesn't offer you leadership opportunities, if your school doesn't have the things that most of the private rich schools already have, then that means when standardized testing goes away, colleges have to look to something else because they're not going to accept 50,000 people, which means if they look to something else, the people with the most access to different activities and money are still going to get a chance to get into those colleges. Now, David's going to get up in the next speech and say, that's inevitable. People have to get money, people have to pass the test in the first place to get to the table, and then they're considered. Our argument is at least if you have a test, the admissions process looks at you, versus if you have no test, now you're compared with how many activities did you do? How well were you in those activities? Did you win any national championships? Did you make a name for yourself? And if you're in a socioeconomically deprived area, you're probably going to have maybe a couple activities that your school offers with not that much funding, so not that many traveling opportunities, not that many leadership opportunities. If that's the case, comparing that one student to the thousands of kids who are doing like 55 different activities because there's no more tests anymore, so they have to do everything that they can do, and they're excelling at the highest levels of those activities because of the fact that they have access to wealth, that means you're never going to get an opportunity to get a seat at the table. The test is the equalizer, and that's why we're winning in this debate. Preparation for the test is unequal, and we'll get to that argument in a little bit, but at least there is a chance to get a score that can potentially get you to the table, even if you don't have access to everything else. However, it only gets worse. Our second contention is that grade inflation is already causing structural inequalities within the education system, and standardized testing is the best way to solve this. In David's world, it's only going to get worse. Freddie Debor writes, in research published in the recent book Measuring Success, Hurwitz and Lee find that whiter schools, more affluent schools, and private schools are all seeing far more grade inflation than higher minority, poor, and public schools. Why is this occurring? Mainly because they have better access to quality teachers because they pay more money for better access. They have better chances to offer AP and IB testing, which means your GPA is intrinsically inflated because those classes offer more credits, which means if you get an A+ in that class, your GPA boosts substantially, which means that students need an equalizer to get to the best opportunities when it comes to the admissions process. If your GPA is substantially lower than someone else's because you didn't take enough AP classes because your school didn't have the resources to give them to you, then that's bad. And that's really bad when David's only criteria are better activities and better grades because there's no more test. Before, if you at least got a good grade on the standardized test, something everyone can equally prepare for because there is no grade inflation in that, then even if you didn't have the best GPA, at least you had a 1500, a 1600 on the SAT, at least you had a 32, 33 on the ACT, which got you to the door. And I know a bunch of people from an anecdotal example that got into good schools that were like maybe the 25th or 30th rank in their class, so their GPA wasn't high, but they at least got a good score on the test, which showed the colleges that this is someone that we can't admit. If that's the case, then all of the arguments in David's case fall because grade inflation and the shift to looking to more activities is going to be substantially worse for all the people that he talks about. Let's go on to his case. First, he says you should evaluate the debate through maximizing educational equity. We will agree with this. We just say the test is the best equalizer in the context of educational equity. Also, trying to solve this problem is like trying to solve income inequality. Education is divided upon class lines, which means it will never be distributed equally. This becomes a question of now how can it become substantially worse? And we already described if you're only paying for activities like schools that have a lot of money to do that, it will become substantially worse, which means it will be bad. His first argument is about standardized tests being oppressive. We will concede it was oppressive when it was created and it has a bad history. That does not mean that it is not an equalizer in the context of today's test. Also, doing things like the Pythagorean theorem or like doing reading comprehension is not just blatantly oppressive. Yes, it has been used badly in the past, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be there in the current day. Also, there's not a better option other than things that are more oppressive, like having access to more funding, which means you have access to more activities, which means it just gets worse in his world. His second argument is that it's a horrible standard for decisions because it's only based on efficiency and it'll become more subjective. This gets worse on your side. It will only become more subjective when college admissions officers are looking at if you did 20 activities versus 5 activities and then pick the person who did 20 activities. The test is an objective metric that makes it equal. Is the preparation for the test unequal? Yes, but at least there is a chance to still do well on the test. His final argument about COVID, look, this is just not a relevant argument. One day COVID will be gone and the test will come back, which means you can't use the current thing that's happening that's affecting the entire world on a global pandemic as a reason to get rid of the test. And if that is the reason to get rid of the test, it will only get worse when we have to look to things like activities.
All right, let's talk about this grade inflation thing for a second. Your argument is that because there is grade inflation, that kids won't get like accepted into these schools. I guess my question is, why does this mean that kids that want to apply to these schools should like, or kids that would like to have their grades considered, should not get to have their grades considered?
Every kid has their grades considered. Our argument is if grades are...
Okay, so the root of your argument is that every kid gets considered.
No, in the status quo, every kid has their grades considered, right? That's part of it. Your world puts a lot more significance on grades. Yeah, your college cares about your GPA. Stanford cares. If you had a 2.3, you're probably not getting into Stanford.
No, I get that part.
Make it worse because now you only care about grades and activities.
I got it. So let's talk about this thing about resources not being distributed equally.
Yes.
I guess my question is, why is this? So this argument only makes sense in a world where we assume that access to like preparation for the test is equal.
No, it doesn't. Is that true? No, no, it's not true. But that's not what this argument relies on.
Well, then how is this more unequal? What metric have you used to determine this is more unequal?
Well, because does it cost some money to prepare for the test? Yes. However, there's two things. One, there's a lot of free resources online to prepare for the test.
And you think those rise to the level that is necessary?
Obviously not. But when it's a context of like a national championship basketball team versus a program that has a school that has no sports, there's not even a comparison. Whereas the test, I mean, you can take thousands of practice tests online. There's a lot of teachers that can help you.
And that will get you... Okay.
It is very possible to do well on those scores. And it's probably patronizing to say that doing that is not possible to do well on the test.
Sure, I get that. My question to you at this point, given everything that you've said, the crux of this debate seems like it's going to be about whether or not these things get fundamentally worse.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you just very straightforward. Mm-hmm. You have said that that the reason why this gets worse is because all of these things end up having to be considered. In a world where a kid does well on the test, do colleges not consider any of these other things?
No, they do, but the test helps a lot in getting them to the table.
How?
Because in your world, if there's no test, then it doesn't matter how well they did because of the wealth inequality. Someone will always do better.
But it seems like
But someone can't. Even if they pay $1,000 for the test, they can only get a 1,600, like me.
Got it.
Or like someone else.
Well,
I didn't get a 1,600.
Of course you didn't. I saw that bullshit immediately. Let's talk about this. If two people get the same test score and then one of them has 20 activities and the other one has 2, who gets accepted?
Well, it's a question of how well they did in the activities.
So wait, then how doesn't that apply to even small schools?
Because our argument is small schools don't even have a lot of the funding or access to
get you to have activities.
No, they do, but not at the level of private schools that have a lot of opportunities for you to get those.
But it seems like that would
activities.
All right, it seems like that would apply to everyone anyway. So.
And also, at least you are in the consideration with the test. You're at least competing against that person. Yes, you are. Without the test, then you're not being considered at all.
Did somebody apply to college for you? Like, do you know how this works?
Yeah, David, you have to just show that the world gets better when we only care about activities. It substantially gets worse, especially when your grades can't compare at the level of a kid from a rich private school. All right, let's take a break from the debate. So, this is an interesting debate. I am definitely arguing against the side I probably don't believe in, but nonetheless, it is a very interesting topic to debate. What are your thoughts on standardized tests, David? I think we both agree that they're probably trash.
Yeah, I mean, the test itself is probably like so this is the thing that's like interesting. The test has become such a normalized part that this is something we almost don't talk about.
Yeah.
Like we almost never talk about whether or not the test itself matters, or whether like a lot of people are like the test doesn't determine whether or not you're actually good enough for college, but like it's kind of just something we've all accepted without question. And I think that being able to like talk about whether or not the test has a place in society or if it's counterproductive is like really, really, really good.
Yeah, especially with the whole COVID thing that's going on now, colleges are definitely realizing that if we can get rid of it because it's not possible to do it virtually, if they don't have a problem admitting students that are still like Harvard criteria, then there's no value of the test at that point. Because I feel like the whole point of the test is like it's stressed. It's a $1 billion industry because it's like if you get this grade or this score, you will get opportunities.
Yeah.
If that goes away and you still get opportunities, then it's a middleman that's not needed at that point.
True. The thing about it is I'm unsure about whether or not it's not so this is the portion that like interests me about the move post COVID.
Yeah.
Is like we just don't know what the process is going to look like. We might like, you know, put this out and then we find out like next like May that like it was a really, really bad idea for them not to consider because they've just become so used to using it
right.
that we just don't know what it would look like. I doubt that like the entire system collapses without the test, but
yeah, this brings up an interesting question of like if COVID makes the whole system collapse in terms of less people going to the schools.
Yeah.
But the whole argument is, and like for Harvard and Stanford, you're going there for brand name, so it doesn't matter if you're there in person as long as you have the brand attached to you. You'll pay whatever money. Which doesn't seem like it would collapse the education system. It would collapse like state schools. Yeah. But it wouldn't collapse the brand schools.
The thing about it though is that state schools have become such a necessity as well that even that I don't know if it collapses it. Because like if there's a necessity to work and get these degrees in order to like be a part of like the job market, and then these schools are just hyper exclusive.
Right.
The next step down is a state school. So state
right.
schools are still firmly like they're still needed.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they like collapse either.
Yeah, because then you would have to replace it with like vocational skills and just like a whole different way of educating people who are young to enter the workforce. I don't think college is going away for a long time. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, you know, low key, people. This entire like situation had people being like, college is a scam.
Yeah,
and I was like, I don't know if it's a scam. Well, there are definitely parts of it that are like pyramid schemish to me. But like, yeah. I don't know. It's I still think it's necessary, and like, you know, if you need it for a job.
I think that's the last thing I was. If jobs don't require the degree, everything changes. But jobs are requiring degrees,
which is why this debate matters.
Which is propping up the system. Conclusion is get rid of student loans, please. Thank you. All right.
I would really, really like that.
That would be helpful. All right. Back to the debate.
Every single time we try to talk about what it would mean to create progress in our communities, we are always told, but what about the possibility of it being worse? But what about the possibility of you having a worse time? I'm confused about why that matters in a world where what is happening right now is literally keeping black and brown students out of the door. I don't think I'm asking for too much when I say that every kid should be evaluated as opposed to using a test that historically and right now is excluding more kids based on racial and socioeconomic lines. That's it. If it is true that that is happening, then you should be willing to say that these tests are bad and we should get rid of them. Now, Amit's arguments against my case are pretty terrible. The first one he makes is that the test is that preparation for the test is more equal than anything else because people don't have the same resources. First and foremost, that's not true. We'll talk about this in the context of this entire oppression thing because it assumes that it's just a question of history. No, the format itself antagonizes people that don't have access to the same amount of prep. The scores are not necessarily what matters because the thing that ends up mattering when these things are evaluated is the percentile you are a part of, which means that you literally have to be better than other people in order to be considered, which makes the test non-objective. Second, he says that the Pythagorean theorem isn't oppressive. Oh, that's great. That's not the question that we've asked either. It's not. If the Pythagorean theorem was the only thing these tests looked for, then I'm sure a lot more people would be getting in, but that's not what they look for, and that's not how the test operates. A lot of it is based on selective information that is based on where you come from, especially on sections like the reading and writing section, which is why white students tend to outperform better. Remember, that statistic from Zachary Goldfarb does not go away just because Amit makes an argument that those things aren't as bad with, oh look, no proof whatsoever. He said it's not a debate about the ethicality or goodness of it. Well, I think we should definitely consider whether or not it's producing a bad consequence for black and brown students, which it most definitely is. Now, the rest of Amit's stuff is about what the negative consequences of this will be. So we'll talk about this briefly. First, Amit says that black students are more likely to pass the test. Oh wait, that's not what he says. He says that black students can pass the test, but that possibility pales in comparison to the probability and the actual statistics we have right now that says that they are less likely to pass. Second is that even when they pass, they can sometimes end up failing. Remember Camilla Campbell, the person that Amit did not talk about? Yeah, black students routinely pass the test and are still looked over in this context. Third, let's talk about what the review process is. Now, a lot of Amit's arguments about why these alternatives are bad assume the standardized test versus one thing. Standardized test versus grade. Standardized test versus essay, which for some reason Amit didn't talk about either. But a holistic review based on Stephen Danido's analysis would solve a bunch of these problems. Amit isolates each of these variables, but all these things in combination end up being a better review process than the one that we have right now. Third and finally, Amit's arguments assume that the SAT is a variable that repeatedly gets considered. He has conceded, based on the last speech, that what ends up happening is that they use it as a benchmark to separate those that do get considered from those that don't. This has two implications. First, it means that all of Amit's arguments about how resources are like unequal and stuff don't matter. Even when kids end up being considered or end up having high SAT scores, they still have to do the same amount of work in the context of these programs or an essay, etc. So our argument is just that all of these things should be considered anyway, because that's the common courtesy that these kids deserve, and that's a better way of choosing applicants because it's more holistic. Second is that it means that Amit's argument about how this equalizes things is not true. Don't disrespect Denzel like that and use his movie title for your stuff. Our argument is that it's not an equalizer, because what ends up happening is that they just push black and brown students out of the way in the first place. If the equalizer shows inequality, you should be skeptical about it, and you should be skeptical about Amit's entire case. Now, the last argument that we're going to make is about whether or not there is access to these programs in the first place. First of all, there just is. Amit is fundamentally wrong about that. Second is that if you're doing 20 activities, it doesn't matter because you're likely trash at most of them because you can't dedicate your time to them. Now, the grade inflation argument. First, you have to submit unweighted GPAs for a bunch of them. If grade inflation is such a thing that we know about, then we're likely to look at a kid that gets a 5.8 GPA and be like, well, this is a question of what you had access to and were able to learn, which means that it's not that big of a deal. Amit has to read evidence, which he has not, that says that grade inflation substantially makes kids unable to be a part of the process at all. And even if that's true, at least black and brown students get to be considered in the first place. That is all we have asked for, and that is not something that will collapse the system or make a worse educational admissions process.
All right, let's talk about the format of the test itself is antagonizing because of selective information.
Yep.
So I have two things. One is, first, the ACT, right, besides the SAT, is a culmination of things you've learned in high school. Why is that antagonizing?
Well, it depends on what you learn. It depends on what you learn in high school. The SAT,
which is mostly standardized across the United States.
Well, yeah. Well, one is
if it's reflected on the ACT, why would you not have learned that?
Well, for two reasons. One is that the quality. That means that the quality of that education in particular matters. If you're right about the way that.
So that means your grades will be affected too if it's about quality of education.
Not really, because if you
have a crappy teacher, how are you going to get good grades?
Because the tests aren't the same in the high
schools.
But
your GPA is just a culmination.
Standardized curriculum is not the same thing as saying that all the tests are standardized.
So you said quality of education. I'm assuming that means teachers.
Well, I'm sure teachers
the person
are part
who gives
of that.
you the education, right?
Yeah,
if they're that crappy that you're talking about, your grades are going to be bad.
I don't think that
right?
I don't think that that's the question, because
you can't pass geometry if you didn't learn it.
Well, the problem with that is that your 4-year GPA is a culmination of a bunch of things.
Right, so but if you continuously have crappy education, it's not a bunch of things, David. It's not like
it's definitely a bunch of things.
No, it's tests that are
yes,
that
it's a bunch of tests over a bunch of subject areas, as opposed to one test.
So here's my question:
3 hours that determines your entire life.
If the education quality is that bad, which is what makes this test antagonistic,
it's not about resources. It's not about being that.
Why won't your GPA just have the same result?
That was not the argument. You keep misconstruing this. My argument is not that people's education is so bad that they can't get access to anything. My argument is that better education then impacts the ability for you to take the test, but it doesn't impact the way that your GPA operates.
How do you get it both ways? How does better education impact the test, but it doesn't impact the 4 years of testing?
Because if your teacher, because even if your teacher is bad, if your teacher teaches you less stuff, but you still pass those tests, your grades still look good.
No, but passing is a C. your grades will be a 2.5.
What are you talking about?
Passing is a C, right, David?
The word pass used in this context is colloquial.
So you're going to get an A- if your teacher is a horrible teacher, which you've just conceded to? Like
no one said it's about being a horrible teacher, but access to things like education.
I'm confused about what quality of education means.
Things like educational resources that would be necessary for you to be able to engage that process.
Okay, the biggest resource, I'm assuming, is the validity of how good a teacher you have.
Not always.
Or else it's private tutoring, and those kids already don't have access to it. So what else is it?
Yes, private tutoring absolutely impacts that as well.
I agree. In neighborhoods you're talking about.
You need to ask the question differently because you're trying to get a concession when no one knows the question you're asking.
Okay, I don't think you're understanding. Your argument is that the test is antagonistic.
Yes.
Because there's because you don't learn about like reading comprehension in the same way that like kids in rich neighborhoods do. Correct?
You don't learn about reading comprehension in the same way.
You said there's selective info that's antagonizing, and you said things like reading and comprehension, not the Pythagorean theorem, right?
I just
need a yes or no on that.
Huh?
I just needed a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, if that is the case, then that means the quality of education you have is so bad that you don't have
let me finish the question. Saying your education is worse is not the same thing as saying that you have the worst education in America.
It's worse. Let me finish the question. We're over time, but we need to get this question out. You have said the test is antagonistic. The reason the test is antagonistic is because of things like reading comprehension is one thing you named, is not as good as what the rich kids have. Not that it's the worst, but it's not as good. Which means that the test is oppressive because it's not as good, which is what you need to win. When you get to the SAT or ACT on that Saturday or Sunday, you're not able to articulate the best answers because you don't have that good of an education. If that premise is true, which we both can agree on, why isn't your GPA affected by the fact that the test that wait, can I finish the question? The test that you take in school, or you're not going to be able to do well on because you're not getting the quality of education that you need to do well on, then why won't your GPA be tanked and not even get a chance to do well in college?
Because you get 4 years to overcome that barrier as opposed to 4 hours to overcome it on the ACT. That's why.
4 hours are a culmination of 4 years of learning. The ACT you learn the Pythagorean theorem in like 9th and 10th grade and then keep going forward. You don't just learn it for 4 hours. It's a culmination of skills. That's what a test is. It's a culmination of stuff you've learned from the past, and then you put it on the test.
I don't get this.
All right.
I'm sure you can just make... I don't know. I don't know what you're saying.
If you were confused after that cross-examination, I don't blame you. Because David just tried to make it confusing because he had no response to the link chain I was walking him down. So I'm going to take these 4 minutes to actually break it down. Couple of big things in this speech which you should listen to carefully because it determines that he has no argument for any of the nonsense that he's talking about. The first thing is he says the test is divided upon racial and socioeconomic lines. We will not disagree with this. However, he does not have the biggest impact in the context of how he can make things worse on racial and socioeconomic lines. There's two things we're going to do in this speech. One, we are going to argue that the structure of the SAT and ACT, which is sort of his biggest argument, is not as antagonistic or oppressive as David is trying to sell you. And two, if it is that antagonistic, then his logic doesn't make any sense about why getting rid of it would make things worse. And we're going to walk you down why that's necessarily true. First argument, it's not that oppressive. There's two reasons for this. One, the ACT is different than the SAT, and this has the same weight as the SAT, so you can't just get rid of this argument. The ACT tests you on what you learned in high school. Science, math, English, it's not just about aptitude, it's about the actual content of the curriculum that you've learned. So if that's the case, it is not built upon this like antagonistic structure, because every kid in America, even though unequally, still gets that same information, and the ACT is literally not allowed to ask you some high-level chemistry question if you haven't taken that class, which is why the science, English, reading, and math are not as antagonistic as David talks about. But second, and more importantly, here's our argument. If it is this oppressive, that means the quality of your education is so bad because the quality of your education does not produce the results that you need to do well on the SAT or ACT. David mentions things like selective information is only available to certain rich students who live in better areas who have better quality of education, which is things like reading comprehension as an example that he gives. Quality of education, don't let him confuse you, is just your teachers. It's how good you have of an environment to learn that information. If that is the case, that means your GPA is also screwed, and that is one of the only couple of factors in David's world that actually matters, which is your grades or their extracurricular activities. Why is your GPA screwed? Because the quality of your education is so bad that you're not learning enough information to do well on the tests that culminate into a GPA. David's going to be like, yeah, but it's 4 years and not 4 hours. That doesn't matter. If you have bad quality education for 4 years, then you're going to have at best average grades for 4 years. And don't let him get out of this argument. Just because you're a strong student and you can do well on a test, even if you have a bad teacher, doesn't mean that all kids can do that. And by the way, if you are that type of student, you can also prepare for this test on your own, and you don't need $10,000 tutors to prepare for the test. Which means all of David's arguments make no sense, because if the quality of the education is so bad, which contributes to why the test is so oppressive, that means your GPA will be so bad, which means you're never going to get into Harvard or Stanford anyway, because you need to have a certain level at that point. If this is the argument, let's just get rid of GPA. If we don't care about 1600s or 35s on ACTs, why do we need a GPA? It seems like numbers are oppressive at that point. This is an argument you should not let go of, because David simply doesn't have a response to why the SAT format is that oppressive for him to justify getting rid of it. So you shouldn't get rid of it, because it's an equalizer. David says it's not an equalizer because everyone gets to the table. Two worlds, because everyone gets to the table. These two worlds explain why that table doesn't make any sense. In his world, everyone's at the table. We evaluate 50,000 kids. In our world, yes, everyone doesn't get to the table, but at least everyone has a chance to get to the table. In his world, you just let them into the door. In our world, there is a criteria in which you get to the door, but once you get there, you have a higher probability and possibility of getting into the school. And in order to actually maximize that, there needs to be something that everyone has a chance to get there, which is this thing that requires you to get a certain score so you get there. In his world, of course, everyone gets to be validated because they're at the table, but it doesn't matter because you're not going to get in anyway, because you don't have the funding or the access to the opportunities that all the other schools have that increase your chance to get there, which is like AP testing, IB testing. Even if it's unweighted, you're still going to have like a 4.0 if you had a 5.8 against other kids, and extracurricular activities. The bottom line is rich schools have better access to all of the things that David wants you to get into college, which makes the world that he's defending worse. In our world, yes, the test is unequal, but everyone has a chance to get a certain grade that at least gets you to the table and then increases your probability of getting considered. If we win that argument, then his world is just worse.
All right, so this argument seems to rely heavily on the fact that everyone can prepare for the test. I really want to talk about that. I want to know what evidence you think substantiates that everyone can prepare for the test in the same way.
Okay, so two things. One, if the ACT is based upon what you're learning in high school, so your 4 years of high school is preparing for the test.
Okay.
If you're talking about the SAT, there are a lot of resources online, free PDFs, things you can, YouTube videos, Khan Academy. I mean, there is you do not need to pay thousands of dollars for a tutor.
So Khan Academy beats a tutor.
David, well, honestly, yes. Like, yes, you have a tutor. You could those
okay.
David, rich people are used to paying substantial amounts of money for things they don't need to pay for.
There are people in the back scoffing at you.
There are so many free resources to do well on this test, and it is super patronizing to be like, because I don't have a $10,000 tutor, I can't do well on a test. I know tons of kids who did not pay for tutors who did well on the test.
That seems, yeah.
And I'm sure you do as well.
Okay, sure. Let's talk about this argument that we should get, that this justifies getting rid of everything. I want you to explain this argument.
I want you to explain this argument. If numbers are bad, why should we have a GPA?
You a question. If
the test is oppressive because of quality of education. Okay, so here's the answer. If the test is oppressive because of quality of education, that means the structure of being in a bad area is also oppressive because of lack of quality of education, which means your grades will suffer, which means let's get rid of the whole GPA. Okay, but what's the point? Okay,
got it. This is my thing then. It seems like you still end up having to consider your GPA in your world, right?
In the status quo, yes.
Yes, in the world.
But at least the test gives you a chance.
How?
So, for example, if you have a 3.2 and that's not like a 4.0, at least you have a 1500. Now you're in the door.
You have a 1500 so they can see your 3.2.
Yes, but the 1500 gives you a chance to get, and then they take into account, oh, does this kid have a 3.2 because he was in maybe a bad neighborhood? Oh, that means we should elevate them. But at least they care.
So that's how you think this works. Got it.
That is how it works,
Got
David.
it.
They're not going to take 50,000 kids and be like, we're going to pick the ones who are in a bad neighborhood who did no activities.
Last thing. So the ACT
Which is the only thing you care about.
So the ACT tests you on what you learn.
Yes, that is literally the ACT.
Got it.
Yes.
My question at that point is, if that is true, how come the ACT just doesn't resolve all of this?
Well, it probably should. Like, people should just take the ACT.
So
wait, thank you for giving me a good argument. So your argument, take the ACT.
So your argument is that black kids should just take the ACT and like nothing else.
Well, a lot of kids don't have to take the SAT. They can just take the ACT.
Okay.
Like a bunch of kids I know, they just took the ACT.
Got it.
I have a friend who got into Harvard who literally just took the ACT.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of this is based on like your friends and not like actual evidence.
But these are people who didn't have access to all the resources you're talking about.
Got it. So we'll talk about
your stats mean nothing. Yes, you're not answering the logic.
We'll talk about our statistics versus your friends.
Your stats are trash. They're not answering anything.
I like my odds. So
you need to major in statistics because you have no odds. Like, you have a really bad chance of winning this debate.
again, cut his mic.
That was a very amazing. My brain is just like a different type of thing on this planet. Like the way I can conceptualize how to make things.
Your brain is weighed
connect.
down by your helmet hair.
No, I think okay. All right. I think the way I can connect things are kind of beautiful. But anyway, a couple things. So this has gotten kind of heated, which is good because I think the energy is up.
I hate you. Okay, keep going.
All right, thank you. I think I'm winning. No. I think I'm trying to win one argument.
I was about to say, you think you're winning.
Because I'm not going to lie, David's previous speech was phenomenal, and I recognize that I can't win a lot of things. So the one thing I'm going for is this like little gap about how the SAT isn't oppressive, and if it is, that means that everything he's talking about is also affected by that. What is your thoughts on this argument?
So I like this move. So there are a lot of people that end up just making people when they debate assume that they have to win everything in every argument in order to win a debate.
Yep.
This is one of the best instances of someone just being I have one premise. Let me use. There was not a single part about that speech that you can't backtrack to that claim.
Yep.
And you also did a full cross-examination on one question.
Yes.
Which is hilarious to me.
Yeah.
But, the fact that you're able to, be this is every implication from this one claim is, pretty dope.
I think it's a Hail Mary, right? Because sometimes in a debate and, in general in any type of communicative project, whether you're giving a keynote speech or whether you're, getting an interview, sometimes there's one thing that you need to win in order to get the other person to believe in the message you're trying to share. And I think the fun thing about a debate, right, is you can have 20 arguments, but if you can win this one tiny little argument and really convince the other person to believe in it, there is a chance that nothing else your opponent says stands up to that.
Yeah.
argument.
I also like that, ordinarily I don't like this, but I like that a lot of your stuff is just you should be skeptical of this.
Yeah.
It's just if this is true, then this is everything that you should then question about the arguments. Because I feel like the original affirmative speech is very much built this is the definitive way, and I think that this debate is going to come down to whether or not you value the definitive as you called it, bad stats,
right,
versus the very healthy and logical skepticism. It's pretty logical to be all of these things could be true about the world I create.
Right. And I think it ultimately comes down to, if you're listening, do you think the world gets worse if we get rid of tests? Or do you think the world can have a fundamental chance of reorienting the entire education system, as David talks about, by getting rid of this horrible standard for how we evaluate tests? So this is a fun debate. We're going to see what ends up happening. And
man, you are crapping on teachers.
Yeah, I was crapping on teachers.
These teachers suck. These teachers are horrible.
But I'm only saying that because, because I'm trying to get the listener to realize, if this is that antagonistic that you can't do reading comprehension, that means you have a freaking horrible education system at your school. If you can't look at a story and answer a couple questions off of it, when that's literally all you do for 4 years in English class, then that means your teachers are bad. And if they're that bad, then I don't know how you're going to get away with having a good GPA or being a well-rounded individual that colleges would like, all that stuff.
Yeah, figure that out.
But then I think, here's even if I win that, your argument is still what does the test do to make that better, right? And at that point, if it is just a question about activities, let's say you're trash at school, at least if you are a national champion in tennis, then it doesn't matter if you have a bad education system.
Tennis?
Yeah.
Of all the sports, you pick tennis?
I pick tennis. I think basketball, football are...
You look like play tennis.
I don't even like tennis, to be honest. I don't watch it.
Well, you're not a Djokovic fan?
I know Djokovic, but I don't like making jokes of which I don't have. All right, back to the debate.
For everything that Amit was able to say in the last speech, for all the negative possibilities that he threw out, he never ever dealt with the question of where we are right now. Listen, this debate is about evaluating the objective way that these tests end up destroying the possibility for black and brown kids to be considered. Now, Amit's best response to this is we have bad statistics. We have two responses. First, Amit has no statistics. This is about whether or not you value Amit's fears over 60 years worth of lasting research. Which do you prefer? Our evidence over the last 60 years says that this test has been detrimental for Black and brown students and for students with poor socioeconomic conditions, which means that it is worth it to interrogate whether or not we should get rid of the test in the first place. Second is just that the pure value of the research that we have done just confirms that these tests are negative or have negative repercussions. Now, a lot of Amit's stuff is about bringing skepticism to your thoughts. Things like, but what about the SAT? Shouldn't the SAT have resolved it? It's not a should question, but a question of whether or not it has or has not. It has not resolved it. What has it done? It has made the situation worse. It has made it harder for Black and brown students to be considered in the first place, which is all you need in order to say that the tests are bad. Now, Amit says that the quality of your information, or the quality of information is just your teachers, and that if your situation is so bad that you can't take the ACT, then it's so bad that your grades would be horrible. First and foremost, this just isn't true. Your teacher can only test you on the stuff that they teach you. So even if you have a horrible teacher, you technically can get a good GPA. Second is that even if that stuff is true, you still have more opportunities to deal with that. You can see the trends ahead of time as opposed to having a 4-hour test that you get to take for a lot of kids from poor socioeconomic conditions only once because they don't have the ability to retake the test because they don't have the finances to retake the test. But you do have the ability to take tests over 4 years and to grow that skill, which means that all of Amit's arguments make no sense. Now, Amit says that we would justify getting rid of everything. No, we will stop here to have a conversation about what a holistic evaluation looks like. Amit has conceded that the test has been problematic, but has no argument for why this gets fundamentally better. But a holistic review is better because it allows us to consider every part of the student, which is what we end up doing right now for all the students that meet the benchmark anyway. This is a question of whether or not you afford that opportunity to everyone else. Amit says that this means there's no objective metric, or that there's no way to determine whether or not someone gets in or not. This is just fear-mongering. It's absolutely nothing. What ends up happening is that we tell kids that don't have the grades that there was nothing about their application worth considering. But allowing the kids to get these good grades doesn't mean that they have a higher chance of getting in. It's just a benchmark that determines whether or not they get considered in the first place. But if students are applying, they should be considered. How is that a controversial statement, and how does that make the world worse? It doesn't. But the impact of potentially being accepted and for being considered can solve generations of poverty because that's the way the job market works. It's a clear decision here. The tests are horrible. The tests have a racist history, a legacy that impacts us today, and we need to get rid of them.
For everything David said in the last speech, he did not answer the one argument we made in the speech before. And we're about to win this argument right now because he goes on a rant and talks about a bunch of things, doesn't answer that one argument. If we win that one argument, that means that a test is an equalizer and that it's a good thing. David starts off his speech by saying it's not about where we're going to go, it's about where we are right now. I agree. Where we are right now is better than where you want to take us, and that's all we need to win. Is it messed up? Yes. Can it get worse in your world? Yes. Sometimes things are messed up, but they can get worse, and in your world, they do get worse, and we're going to explain why, and that's why we're going to win this debate. A couple key things David talked about that I want to mention. One, he goes on this rant about how his statistics are good. Look, I don't care about the statistics. This is about the logic of the argument. Just because you have statistic that says education is unequal and the test is distributed under unequal lines, congratulations, you've said that people are poor and people are rich, and rich people have it easier. Good job for your statistics. They don't answer that if you get rid of the test, things can still get worse. Like, how can you just say things are really bad right now? We have all these stats. Amit has no stats. He's fear-mongering. And then be like, these stats are the reason why we should get rid of the test. That's an illogical argument. Getting rid of the test does not substantiate why your statistics will show that things will get better in your world. So there's not a reason to vote for him just because he has cited statistics. Here's the main argument you need to vote on. He thinks that the test is antagonistic and oppressive. One, he did not answer the fact that the ACT, which is a viable alternative to the SAT, is literally not, because it's everything you learn in college or in high school, but we'll give him the SAT is more built on aptitude. Even if you don't buy that, you could just take ACT instead of the SAT. He's not answered the fact that if the contingent reason for why it is oppressive or antagonistic is purely based upon the quality of education you have, then this impacts every other argument that David's going for, and that's something that he just didn't answer. If the quality of education that you have is bad, then that means your GPA will be bad. He says this ridiculous thing that says like, teachers can only test you on the stuff they teach you, but if you have a bad teacher, you can still have a good GPA. What is this? If teachers can only test you on the stuff they teach you, but you have a bad teacher, it seems like you're not going going to learn a lot of things because you've got bad education from that teacher, which is the quality of education, which means you will not be able to get a good GPA because the tests are based on what they teach you. Why is this important? If you don't have a good GPA, that means you're not going to get considered into college. David says, oh, we're only asking that if we apply, we should be considered. Are you kidding? So a 1.7 GPA student should be considered to Harvard? I'm not saying that Harvard is like this ethical actor, but I'm saying that these are the standards and the institutions that David's trying to get access to. You can't just get access to them by having these subpar standards. And the one thing that can make it equal, the one thing that can stop, that can help you get into a college, even if you have a bad GPA or even if you don't do all the activities that are the only thing David wants in your world, is the test. It's something that you have a chance to get access to. Yes, the test doesn't have an equal preparation cycle. That doesn't mean that kids aren't able to Google things and look at resources to do well on the test. And if your teachers are already bad, that means they're not going to help you on the test in the first place, which means it's a question of being able to do this on your own. The final thing I said is if the test is bad, let's just get rid of the GPA because that's just a culmination of tests. And David's response is, no, we will not do that, but we will stop here to have the conversation about the oppressive nature of tests, without answering the fact that if it's oppressive, that means your GPA is also, as a byproduct, oppressive, because then the quality of education you're getting, which is contingent upon your GPA, is oppressive. None of his arguments make sense at the end of the day. Yes, the test is bad. Yes, the test is unethical. We get all of that. But he wants you to vote for it so people just get access to the admissions office. Our argument is there is a reason why there's a barrier to get there, and that barrier is the equal opportunity for people to try to get there. In his world, it's only about how many activities you did, and if you don't have funding for those activities or you don't have AP or IB classes, you're screwed. That's why you shouldn't vote for him in this debate.
Good debate.
Let's talk about this debate now that it's over.
Dude, okay, so my favorite part of this debate by far is just how much you deteriorate. It kept scaling down. At first you were like, yo, passing the test requires private tutors, da, 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 da. Then it was like, bro, you could pass the test just by being on Khan Academy, there's free online resources. And by the last speech you were like, kids could just Google. Google solves the test. I was just like, it just kept being like, tests got easier by the end of the debate.
But I think my whole point was that it's not easy, but it's possible.
Yeah.
I
definitely got that. I just saw the trend. I was like, Google, sir.
Could Google Khan Academy. You'll find it. Yeah, man, I think this was a fun debate. I think we both are on the same side that we should probably get rid of tests. But if you're going to vote for someone, we're definitely curious for who you would have voted for.
It's obviously me.
It's not David. Yeah, I think the last speech I went for, I liked your last speech a lot. I do think, though, that, there were some funny lines, which is just, teachers can only test you on the stuff they teach you.
So, here's the thing about that. Technically...
You didn't bring up the actual things you were going to bring up, right? Which is that teachers are not the only...
Yeah, there was some stuff in there about how, quality of testing and or quality of books and your just your general environment impacts that stuff. But I was wary of doing that a little bit just because I was like, well, then why wouldn't that literally mess up your ability to ever do it? I felt like it might
hurt you more
end
than
up justifying your argument that this would justify getting rid of GPA and then we'd have no system.
That's true.
That's the only problem with this is when you set up the second speech to be anything you say, I will just take it to the logical extreme.
Which is the pivot that I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just I have to walk this line very carefully because I also know that you get the last speech and I don't get to be no afterwards.
Right.
Which is something
that's
people
fun,
take a lot of advantage of.
Yeah, no, a couple of debates we have, I don't think there's been that massive of a pivot that made you walk that careful, or made any of us walk a very careful line.
I've never had to change an entire, I come in, the best way to think about a debate when you have a topic is to think about it from, in reverse order. What do I want to say, and how do I build up enough that what I want to say is good?
Right.
In the debates that we've done so far, I've never had a situation where I have literally had to change that post facto.
Right.
You pushed me in this debate.
Right. That's why, and I liked it. That's why it was fun, man. Because I'm definitely, and the reason it's fun is because I definitely have the non-conventional, intuitive side in this case. At least for our generation, most kids are like, yeah, screw the test. We should not have a test. So picking to debate something that I don't agree with and that most people don't agree with, you have to be very let's do this, let's do this, let's do that. Let's try to get the argument here, in order for us to have an opportunity to capitalize.
Okay, now this was low-key another one of my favorite parts of the debate. So there was a moment in this debate where, like, we were talking, like, you were just like, bro, I know people that, like, got into college because they were able to take tests. And I have friends that, got into Harvard and stuff.
I do. I'm not lying.
Yeah, I get that. The hilarious part about it is I'm one of your friends that benefited heavily from the fact that standardized tests were a thing. I had at least by my junior year, I had a pretty trash GPA in comparison to, like, a lot of people. And I did really, really well on the test. And it was weird. So it wasn't just, and this is something that you didn't really talk about, but something that can be a thing. It wasn't just that the test made my application better, because, like, I got, like, close to, like, a 1400.
Right.
It wasn't just that the test made my application better, but the perception that that the standardized test would be good,
right,
or would help my application encouraged me to think, well, maybe if I bump up my GPA just a little bit, it doesn't have to be a 4. It gave me the confidence to think that there was a lane for me, and gave me the confidence to apply to schools that without a 1400 I just wouldn't have applied to. So, like, at that point I was just like,
so you're saying that could have been one of my arguments?
Yeah, like
that, like, if you're doing bad the test and do well in the test, it can motivate you to do better in school. Yeah,
because at least now you think there's an whether or not there's an opportunity or not doesn't matter.
Right.
Because students think there's the perception that the test fundamentally changes how their application works. Even if it doesn't, it encourages them to try to be better and try to meet a basic benchmark that would make them better. Right. It's just like perception impacts everything else that you do.
Right.
Which
That's a good argument.
That was at least true for me. Yeah. It's probably not true for everyone, but it's really logical, and I have to. That would push me even further.
The reason it's not true for everyone is because most people with a bad GPA don't end up doing well on the test.
Yep.
Right, and then they're just like, all right, forget it.
Yep. But according to Amit, I had Khan Academy, then Google.
Well, how did you prepare for the test? If you did better than most people, so
this is the funny part. I don't remember how I prepared for the test. I remember I was supposed to retake the test to see if I could get a better score, and I slept through the retake.
That's so David.
I woke up at 12. The test was at 8.
Guys, we were at a debate tournament once. This is in Atlanta, Georgia, right?
Yeah.
And David slept through the first round of the day, and that is the reason why you ended up ultimately not advancing far in the tournament.
No, yeah, I advanced, and then because my record was bad because I had an automatic loss, I had to debate one of the better people at the tournament, and then I lost that debate.
Really?
Yeah. Somebody you ended up coaching, actually. I think John?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why sleep is important, but it's for the weak, as they say. No, I'm just kidding. You should get your sleep. But, yeah, this is an interesting debate. I like this debate. I like the analysis you just gave right now about how that perception matters a lot.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I mean, I think my thoughts are definitely in the age of COVID, we should get rid of this test. I do think there should be a different metric, but again, with rich people, like, this is the one thing I forgot to say in the last speech. Education is always going to be unequal. Yeah. So if that's the case, rich people will always have better access to whatever criteria colleges want, especially with this lady paid $500,000, the Full House lady, for her daughters. Like, they're just gonna pay and do more bribes, and so
that's wild. You paid I'm sorry, this is a tangent, but you paid $500,000 to get your child into USC, and then the first video she puts out is like, yeah, I don't really like school or care about it that much.
She did that?
Yeah, I was like, huh?
Ungrateful people. We have ungrateful people.
I also wish I could do that. Like, I really wish.
And USC is a party school, too.
I wish I had $500,000 that I could use to pay for my daughter to go to school, and then I would not pay for my daughter to go to school.
Right, exactly.
I would use that $500,000 to get, like, I don't know, like a house.
I think by the time we have kids, I don't think this test's going to be around. I genuinely don't think. College will probably be here, but this test shit, it's not going to be
Probably. College definitely needs to be here. I don't want people operating on me without college.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for definitely a lot of. I'm just thinking for like some of the humanities stuff, it might just be too overpriced at this point. But
yeah.
All right, fun debate. Let us know what you guys think, and let us know who you won the debate. We're out.